Just starting off with last week's game, just starting off with the positives. Obviously, it was great to find a way to win. When you're not having your best day, not executing as clean as you need to find a way to get the win is definitely a positive. And I think, for Trevor, that's probably the first time in his 16 starts at Clemson that he kind of found himself in that situation. I know this year's offense, that was definitely our first time, being on the field in the fourth quarter, needing a touchdown to win the game. And I felt like our guys had some of the best execution there on that last drive and responded. I thought another positive, Trevor and T hooked up on 5 explosive plays down the field, none bigger than the 3rd and 6 on the last drive there. Obviously, there's a lot to learn from that game. Starting off, had a nice drive going in positive territory, 3rd and 2. We threw the screen out there and lost yardage. We were really in a 2-down territory, and after we lost yards, had to go for the field goal. And then a couple drives later, we had a nice 9-yard run and then fumble it on the next play, and then they go down and score a touchdown. And, just overall, I think we misidentified some of the blitzes that they were bringing. They did a really good job. You got to give them credit for some of the things they were doing from a scheme standpoint. But I just think, us not communicating correctly led to the sack and a couple of the quarterback hurries and made Trevor have to get rid of the ball a little earlier than he wanted to. I know one play we had Justin Ross for potential touchdown there and missed that. And then the other thing that really showed up that has not been a problem all year was the 5 penalties offensively, and penalties are really just drive killers. I mean, we had some nice drives going and then kind of stall because of self kind of inflicted deal there with the penalties. And then, overall, the biggest thing watching the video was just, a lack of the consistent execution that maybe we've had in other games. So I think it was a good time for an open week. Last week was really beneficial for us, going back, not looking just at the North Carolina game, but really all 5 games and seeing where we can get better. I think really focusing on the details of what we're doing and the fundamentals of how we do it. Also did a really good self-scout offensively, and then also at each position, just looking at all the details, making sure that we're countering any of the tendencies that we may have. But I felt like our guys responded very well last week, had a really good week of practice. I know it was good to kind of get a break this weekend for players and coaches and, get geared up, ready for Florida State this week. Looking at Florida State on videos, you kind of go through their season. There's no doubt that they've improved from where they were after the first 2 games defensively. They probably played their best game defensively in their last outing with NC State, holding them to maybe 370 and 88 rushing. So you can see a lot of improvement. They're getting better game by game. Probably be the biggest defensive front that we'll face all year. They really primarily run an odd front, and I think they're 311, 346, and 305 across the board. So really big guys up front that kind of play 2 gaps and make it difficult to move those guys inside. They've done a good job getting some pressure on the quarterback. They've got 17 sacks on the year, and as always, very athletic on the back end, and just look like they're a lot more comfortable here these last few weeks, knowing what they're doing. For us, our next goal is to win the division, and this is a big division game for us. Seems like every year Clemson and Florida State end up having a lot to say for the division. So I know our guys will be refocused and ready to go Saturday at 3:30.
Who jumps out at you on that Florida State defense?
Yeah, I think really all 3 of those guys up front, just because of how big they are. They do a really good job of using their hands. You don't see them get knocked back very much. And then I think coming off the edge, they've got some guys that have created some good one-on-one matchups with the left tackle and right tackle, and creating some pressure. And really what they're trying to do whenever they bring pressure from the edge is get the quarterback to really have to step up, and then they're just kind of, trying to move that offensive line backwards and take up space there for the quarterback.
When you look at where Clemson is now, does it remind you at all where FSU was back in its heyday?
Yeah, it does for sure, and I've talked about that before. I think there's a lot of similarities in the culture of the program that Florida State had when my dad was there in the 80s and early 90s under Bobby Bowden, and maybe what we're doing now here under Coach Sweeney, and just the consistency that they had. I think they went on a run, at least 10 years, if not more, of top 5 finishes. If they'd had the playoffs back then, they probably would have had a couple more opportunities for national championships. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities. The funny thing for me is maybe being a kid, when I look back at kind of my dad's career, I think that we were at Florida State forever, and then we came to South Carolina, and then we've been at Clemson. And now looking back, my dad going into his 20th year here at Clemson, and he's been at Clemson now twice as long as he was ever at Florida State. So it's kind of unique now looking back. But there's no doubt those were, a special time. Very similar to what, I've been fortunate to do here at Clemson, kind of moving up from being a graduate assistant to a recruiting coordinator, and now in an offensive coordinator role, is very similar to my dad's path there at Florida State. And for him to be able to work under a guy like Bobby Bowden, and then many years later me get the opportunity to do that under a guy like Coach Sweeney, is very rare and a true blessing for our family.
Were you able to watch any of that Bowden dynasty on the ACC network? See your dad on the sidelines?
Yeah, I did. It's kind of funny. My dad was hanging on Bobby Bowden after one of those touchdowns, a lot like I can get caught hanging on Coach Sweeney celebrating. But what was really cool about that I guess video that was out there is for me, the locker room images or video of the locker room and seeing Bobby Bowden talk to the team, like I was right there. I mean, I can remember sitting in Charlie Ward's locker, looking over his shoulder as he was kind of sitting on the stool right in front of his locker, and that was the first time in whatever that's been 25 years that you actually get to see the footage of what you remember, and it was exactly how I remembered it. So that was neat for me, just kind of going back watching that, and kind of neat to see my dad when he was a little younger, and in there having those conversations with Coach Bowden on the sideline.
Jeff, our defenses, I guess specifically North Carolina and Syracuse, are they trying to take away the middle of the field, all the intermediate stuff?
Yeah, I think we can get a little bit too far down that road maybe on what defenses are doing. I mean, I think now after you played 5 games, we're seeing a little bit of everything. And I think it's just our job as coaches and players to number one, execute on what we're trying to do. And number two, kind of find out how they're playing us and then go attack, the area maybe where they're weak. I felt like North Carolina did a great job. Coach Bateman's an outstanding coach. I was with him last year at the Broyles Award. We were both finalists for that and spent 2 days with him. And, he did a great job schematically with some of the things that they did. And, I felt like we made some adjustments and we had some plays there. I mean, you look back at, Cornell, on a little play where we felt like they were kind of had a lot of guys inside in the box, and we flip it out there to Cornell, and, he's got a chance to run for a long ways and just falls down, and that's not something Cornell does a lot of. It's just kind of, for whatever reason, it seemed like it was kind of that afternoon for us, and we couldn't get out of our own way when we had opportunities to kind of take advantage of some things that we were able to see.
What did you learn about Trevor in this year's offense in the fourth quarter of a tie game? You want to see that, but then again, maybe you don't want to see that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's like I said, that's the first time maybe that Trevor's been in that situation, and what we learned is maybe what we already think about Trevor. He's a guy that, he's not a guy that plays tight. I mean, that's really, you got to give North Carolina credit. They did a good job. Their game plan was really to kind of limit our possessions, create a long game, get it into the fourth quarter, and then put all the pressure on us. And so maybe the normal situation for a quarterback in that situation would be to press and maybe, not be able to execute. But Trevor was calm, and he knew exactly what he was seeing, and did a really good job on that last drive and went down and executed. And I think, like I said, there's something to be said for that. When you're going to have games where you're not playing as efficient and executing as well as you need to, but being able to find a way to win those games, even though you're not playing your best, is really what allows you to have the long string of consistency that we've had. But obviously didn't want to go through it, but it'll definitely be a good experience in case we find ourselves in a similar situation down the road.
Are there any differences in either how you attack defense or how defense attacks you when they're an odd front versus more of an even front? Just kind of on layman's terms to the fans.
Yeah, there definitely is a difference. I mean, there's they're actually playing very similar to how North Carolina played us, and it's really just what Florida State does, of what we call an Okie front. So they've got, they're covering up your tackles and covering up your center, and then they got one other defensive end that can play either to the field or boundary, and they're really trying to buy up your 5 offensive linemen and get that end free on a running back, or maybe find a way to get you hot. But the biggest thing is it's different. Sometimes you have to block things differently for the guys up front, so there's some communication, especially on third down. Whenever there's different blitzes and things that are coming, it's different from an odd front to an even front. Now for us, the good thing is Coach Venables is very multiple, so we see a lot of that on our field. So it's not something that our guys don't get a lot of experience with. But yes, going back and forth between an even and odd front, there's a lot of communication that has to take place.
The play that Trevor made in the third quarter when the middle opened up and he tucked it and ran, and then he had the one where he rolled out to the left and found T. Higgins on third down. Those maybe a couple examples of plays he might not have made with his legs last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trevor's done a good job for the most part of finding a way when those opportunities present themselves. I think the one that he took off down the middle, they might have been in 2-man, and so he realized that a lot of their defenders were out covering the pass route, and he's able to recognize that, pull it down, had a nice run. And then on the other one, he did a good job of scrambling, but also keeping his eyes downfield, looking for an opportunity, and him and T were just on the same page there on that completion. But there's no doubt that I think Trevor feels more confident and when to run with the ball, and then how to run and protect himself. And, his legs will be important to us here as we get on with the second half of the season.
Did UNC do anything specifically against Amari that made it maybe a little more difficult to get him involved?
I don't think they did anything maybe different than what we've seen. I think from a coverage standpoint, they had a guy over the top of him where there was a safety or nickel Sam, but it really wasn't. Really what they were giving us was some of the downfield balls. They were sitting pretty low with their safeties, trying to take away the bang eights that we normally hit in the middle of the field, and also having low safeties. As soon as they saw run, then they can kind of trigger down to the run. So it really was a game creating more opportunities maybe down the field, and some of the balls like we hit T and also Justin Ross. The ball that we threw to Cornell, that was a ball that, Amari would have had if he was in the game in his same position. So, there's different ways to try to get those guys involved. I felt, we didn't do as good a job on the perimeter on some of the screen game that maybe we had in previous games. That would have been some opportunities for him to run with the ball.
Is that just execution with the screen game?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of identifying the correct looks and then executing the blocks on the outside.
Jeff, you guys have won 4 in a row against Florida State now. Do you think that recent dominance has diminished the intensity of this rivalry at all?
I don't think so. I mean, I think our guys, they know when they turn on that video, they can recognize how athletic and talented these guys are. I mean, I hadn't seen the exact stat for this roster, but I would guess that if you would go back on any of the recruiting roster rankings, they probably still have more 4- and 5-star guys than we do. 4 years ago, they had the #1 class in the country. And so I think our guys understand this is a dangerous team, very athletic, a lot of playmakers, and I think we proved it last week. It doesn't matter who you play, whether you think you're more talented than them or not. If you don't execute, then you're going to put yourself in a difficult situation. And so I think especially coming off of maybe where we were last week, I don't think our guys have any concerns of being able to look ahead or anything like that. I mean, we know we got a bullseye on our back. We're going to get everybody's best shot. And, we got to play well every week. We don't have to play perfect to win, but we got to play well and be able to execute. And it'll be the same way this Saturday.
It's got to help for you guys, though, and for the players, I guess, that this is your rival in the division and the conference every year.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, just the history of this division, it's come down a lot of years to Clemson or Florida State, and they had a run on us before we have been able to kind of turn it the last few years and get a run. So, I mean, I think everybody in our program, coaches and players, know that this is always one of the best programs that we're going to face in our division each week. And for our next goal, I mean, they control their own destiny. They don't have a loss in the division. So they know what they have at stake as well on their side.
Isaiah and Skowski said that practice leading up to UNC was just not great, and then some people were off the mark. Did you sense that? Yeah, I think
I know Coach Sweeney made a comment that Wednesday defensively was not their best, and I felt like Thursday was not our best offensively. We weren't able to get through our entire script, and don't know why that is, but I think that's a good lesson as a coach. When you don't play well, you always want to go back and maybe look at things in practice. And it's not anything major. It's just the intensity and the focus on being able to execute. And if you're not quite as intense or not quite as focused, then that leads to a lack of execution, which is really what we had in some of the situations Saturday.
Jeff, getting back to the dynasty stuff for a second. You guys are in a run like Florida State had now. I mean, what's that like? Is it fun all the time? Is it nerve-wracking? What's it like to be in the middle of it thinking, okay, we are expected to do well all the time and we've got to keep it up?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of everything. Yeah. No question. I think, the biggest thing is we don't sit around and talk about how many games we've won in a row or count them down or anything. I think Coach Sweeney and our staff try to do the best job we can of making each week about that opponent that we're playing, and I think that's one reason that maybe we've had that success is because we have really each week tried to focus on what we have in front of us. But I think the biggest thing that comes from that is you're going to get everybody's best shot. I mean we didn't play as well as we could have and as well as we should have Saturday. But North Carolina played very well. I mean, if you went back and graded their defense, I mean, we got their best shot. And that's to come to be expected now when, you're kind of one of those teams at the top. But I think as a coach, you love where you are. There's challenges in everything. I mean, we've been on the other side where we haven't had the success, and there's a lot of challenges that come with that. And then when you have had a lot of success, I mean, there's challenges. I mean, we got a lot of guys in this team that haven't lost a game. I don't know how many. Coach Sweeney knows exactly how many freshmen and sophomore we have on this team, which is probably over half our roster, and they've never lost a game. And so I'm sitting here as coaches, you're trying to remind them of things in practice or whatever that can cost you a game, but they've never experienced that. And so there's a challenge that goes with that as well. I mean, that's the good kind of challenge. That's the one that you want. But I think overall, it's something that obviously you're not you don't have your head in the sand and know that it's going on, but it's really something to enjoy after the season or later on in your career. But this is kind of our go time. This is when we got to stay focused on what we're doing each and every week, and all that stuff is great to kind of add to and look back at later.
When you went back and did some self-scouting last week, were there any big things that kind of stood out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the details of that, obviously, because that kind of leads into maybe some things that we'll want to do Saturday and moving forward. But I think overall, The biggest thing that they're obviously are, when you're a good offense or you're a good defense, you're going to have some tendencies. That's just part of it. I think some of the teams that don't have any tendencies is because they're just running a bunch of stuff trying to find something to get good at. So I think number one, it's as coaches, okay, after 5 games, Florida State has 2 weeks to kind of get ready. What are they seeing, whether it's our run pass in certain formations or certain motions or certain alignments. So those are things. We got a great support staff that really breaks all that down and writes all that on the board. So as we go to game plan, we try to play to counter some of those tendencies. But I think overall, as we look at our offense and look at each position, it's really just kind of locking in on maybe some of the reasons why we haven't executed. And a lot of it is, it's real boring stuff. It's communication, it's alignments, it's assignments, it's being on the same page. Is just that kind of that, the very small things of what we do. That really is the biggest thing, and just allowing those guys, now that we've had 5 games, to kind of put that on paper and put some video in front of them to show them, that, hey, when we know what we're doing, when we're using the proper technique, we're able to execute, and that play looks really good. When we don't, this is what it looks like. And so I think just kind of learning from that overall. But there's definitely some things, we're able to see this past week that, we knew that we had some tendencies on that maybe we want to try to counter that here as we move forward.
Anything else?